Okay, so today we will be continuing our discussion of Python by taking a look at our coding example from the Python intro. If you remember, we wanted to write a program to fetch and display some aspect of the current weather as a way to explore the use of APIs. In this case, we're going to use the weather.gov API because it doesn't require an API key or any authentication, so we can get straight to using it. I'll be using a Google Colab notebook, which just functions like a Jupyter Notebook so that we can take a look at the code and intermediate steps, but obviously code wherever and however you would like. I'll be using the request module to handle API calls because I think it's pretty simple to use, but it's certainly not your only option, and I'll show you some other options towards the end. So the first thing we're going to want to do is to take a look at the API documentation to determine how to use it and what kind of calls we're going to make. Here under the Examples tab, we can see that accessing the weather is going to be kind of a two-step process. First, we're going to need to use our latitude and longitude to get a grid corresponding to the location we want. And then we can use that to actually query for the weather. So here we have the latitude and longitude for the location we want, and we're going to be using this in the call we saw before on the website. So here we can now make our first request. We'll be using the get function from the request module, so request.get, the URL we want, and then we're going to plug in our latitude and longitude into there. And so this is going to actually make the call. The only problem is now we just have something that looks like this, which doesn't really mean anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn that into a JSON dictionary, which is going to be using just .json, so r.json, and then that's going to turn it into something that's going to be really simple to look at. So this output here is exactly what you would see if you actually went to this website. So as an example, we can look up here. And so this is exactly there, but this is a little easier to read, so we can look at this here. And so what we can see is this is a bunch of, some information, just nothing super interesting. But what we really want is under this properties key, because we can see that with this properties key, we can access lots of things like the location that we're at, and then we can see the grid here that we were talking about earlier that we wanted, as well as some sample calls so that we can get different weather. So let's go back here. So we're going to first want to just get down to this properties information, because this is where all the information we actually want is. So to do that, it's a really simple thing. We're just going to say points at properties. And so then if we do that, we get all the information that was under properties. So one thing we can do is make sure that we're actually at the correct location. So we have properties, and then maybe we want to parse out the actual city. Then we go relative location, and then properties under that, and then cities under that. And you can kind of see that in the indentation here. It's even clearer on the website here. Relative location, properties, city. So if we do that in that order, we can get, Urbana. So that should be correct. So now what we actually wanted was we wanted to actually get a way to actually get the weather. So there's two ways we could have done this. We could have, one, just gotten the grid X and grid Y and then plugged that in to the API call we were talking about here. In this case, the API actually just directly gives us the URLs, which is really nice. So we're just going to grab the forecast URL. So under properties, we're going to just grab forecast. And that's going to become our URL. Okay. So now we're going to do that again, but now we're going to do that whole process again, but we're going to actually get the weather now. So we're going to do request.get using this URL, and notice now we don't actually have to plug in anything because this already has the grid plugged in, but if we had just used the grid as is, we would have just plugged that in like we had before up here. Okay, so we have that. We're going to turn it into a JSON, and then we're going to actually get some information here, and I'll actually show you what the forecast looks like before we do this. So maybe let's get this out of here, and we can look at what the forecast looks like here. So now we have this full forecast, and obviously there's a lot of information here, and it's not super prettily formatted here, so we'll go on to the online just so we can look at it. And so we can see that there's just a bunch of information here, and what we're interested in is this periods. And so in here we can see that for each period, which determines a different time period, we can get some weather information. So for example, the first period is going to be for this afternoon, and I think this changes from time to time depending on what time of day it is. This is updated in real time, but basically the point being this is the information we're interested in. So if we go back here, like before, we're interested in what's under the properties and then under periods. And not that all this other information isn't relevant, but obviously here we're just going to be looking at this. So let's do this and then look at what that looks like. So now here we just have a bunch of different weather information. Now again, all of this is going to look very different from API to API, topic to topic, so do look at some sample API calls to figure out what kind of information is there and how it's formatted. In this case, we can see that this periods, the object is just this array of objects corresponding to different weather forecasts. So if we want the latest forecast, then we're just going to grab the first object in this array. So let's do that. So we're just going to grab forecast at 0. Again, it's just an array. You can see that it's an array by how it's formatted. If we look at it up here, you can see that this is, our array formatting. So let's do that. And so now we have all the information that we want available to us. So for this case, I'm just going to grab the detailed forecast. So let's do that. And there it is. So that's pretty much it. And then you can do whatever you want with this information. Here's that all together. And the point here being, it's not that much code. Once you the hardest part is just going to be, looking at your data and figuring out how you want to get things out, but it's not going to be very difficult in terms of amount of code, so that's really nice. As promised, here's just another way to do pretty much the same thing using some different modules. Here we're using the JSON and URL-lib modules. The nice thing about this is that both of these are built into Python, so there's no need for a separate install or anything. You can use this pretty much straight away. But then you'll see the process is pretty much the same. Here is just us getting the grid based on our latitude and longitude. This is just turning it into JSON dictionary. And then again here it's the same access. So the actual details change a little bit, but the process doesn't change at all. So you can use whatever you like the most.